مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. بعد آسيا، أفريقيا هي أكبر القارات وأكثرها ازدحاما بالسكان. إنها تضم أكثر من 50 دولة اليوم، وهي أيضا المكان الذي شهد بداية الحياة البشرية، وعاش فيه بنو الإنسان لأطول فترة زمنية. أعلن الرئيس ترامب رسميا انتصار أميركا على داعش، ولكن في أفريقيا التطرف الأصولي والإرهاب العنيف من جانب جماعات مثل بوكو حرام والشباب يهددان حياة الناس في إنهاء القارة. لمناقشة قضية الإرهاب في أفريقيا يسرني أن أرحب بلجنتنا التي تضم الخبيرين ميلفين فوت ونايل Gardner. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Today we're going to talk about Africa, the world's second largest continent, more than 1 billion people, and a region of great opportunity but great challenge. And we're going to talk about America's relations with this continent. And I'm delighted to welcome Niall Gardner and Melvin Foote. So, gentlemen, let's first start on a positive note. So many people start on negative notes. Let's start on a positive note. What's your preferred Africa success story for our viewers?
Well, I think Africa is on the rise, and we look at all the stories about famine and corruption and all of these things. But then you look at the continent as a whole, and it's a bright future. You see a very young, dynamic population. You see dynamic leadership emerging in places like Ethiopia, elsewhere on the continent. So I think Africa is on the move. I think the world is competing for Africa. We see the Chinese are coming. We're seeing the Americans are coming. The Russians are coming. Everybody wants a piece of Africa because of the tremendous natural resource. But I think Africa is on the move. I think they're figuring out how to lead the continent. They're merging the country's economies. They're doing a lot of things that are right.
All right, great. Niall, what's your, do you have a success story that our viewers should hear?
Well, that's a good question. I agree that overall, the big picture for the future of Africa is one of optimism. And I think that despite all the constant negativity in terms of the coverage of Africa, terrorism, for example, famine in some parts of Africa, the reality is that overall economic freedom is on the rise in the African continent. And you can see that from West Africa to East Africa to in a range of countries that, just decades ago actually were in real poverty. Those countries today are becoming real economic success stories. And you look at the rising sort of regional superpowers in Africa, Nigeria, South Africa, for example. I mean, countries who are certainly, I think, going to be forces to be reckoned with on the international stage in the coming decades. But a lot more needs to be done, I think, in terms of creating the kind of environment in African countries that can foster economic growth, that can foster economic and political liberty and freedom. At the end of the day, the future of Africa's success depends upon the ability of African leaders to embrace, on the one hand, free market policies, free trade, but also political liberty, political freedom. Those freedoms are absolutely vital, I think, for the future success of the African continent.
So Niall already began a conversation of what are the big challenges facing Africa. Melvin, let me ask you, what do you identify as the biggest problems that African leaders and African peoples are facing today?
I think Africa's relationship to the world. It seems to me that the world wants to exploit Africa. We're interested in Africa because of the natural resources, the oil, the gold, the diamond, the coltan. That's our strategic interest in Africa. The Chinese are interested for what reason? The oil, the gas, the timber, the fish, natural resources. The Germans are interested for the same thing. So Africa's biggest challenge is going to be how it's going to relate to the rest of the world, how it's going to make sure that the market is fair, how it's going to make sure that international policies, the World Bank policies and so forth are fair. So I think the biggest challenge is going to be how Africa is going to relate to the world. Now, Africa also got to figure out how it's going to deal with its youth population. Some of these countries, the population 40, 50% are under 30 years old. and they're interconnected. They got Facebook, they got Twitter. They're hearing about what each other is doing. And they don't want. They're no longer going to accept the president for life, 50 years in office in Togo or Cameroon. They're not going to accept it. And so Africa got to figure out how it's going to integrate its next generation leaders into the country, and how it's going to deal with each other, how we're going to deal with each other, the diversity. And I think another big challenge that Africa is going to have to figure out is how it's going to deal with the diaspora. Those like myself, I'm an American of African descent, sitting in Washington, D.C., really have access to power. How do you engage me to make sure that I lobby my own government to make sure we do the right things to help Africa? So I think those are the main challenge. We hear about famine, we hear about wars, all that. Some of that's being dealt with, but a lot of it is being stirred up by these outside influencers who like the ideal of tyrants. If I got a tyrant, I don't have to deal with the people. I don't have to build schools. I don't have to build health clinics. I could just deal with the tyrant, put some money in a Swiss bank account, and be done with it. So Africa got to deal with some of that kind of stuff.
Now, Niall, you actually lived in your early years in one of those countries that had a president for life, or nearly for life. That's Zimbabwe. How serious is that problem today in Africa? Do you see Africans beginning to address it positively?
Well, I think that remains a serious problem for many African countries, including in Zimbabwe itself, actually. And so I think that, as Melvin also mentioned, that one of the biggest problems that we face in Africa today is a continuation of some tyrannical regimes. I think there are fewer today than there were, say, 20 or 30 years ago. And so I think the trajectory is in the right direction. And the reality is that younger Africans wish to see free societies. And I think that this is the kind of sweeping change that we're seeing across many African countries today. But the reality is there are still too many dictatorial regimes. There's still a great deal of corruption in many African countries, which is a huge problem. And in addition to that as well, I think you do have countries such as China, Russia, who are certainly exacerbating Africa's problems rather than assisting, and in some cases supporting dictatorial regimes, and that's a real problem. And so the United States has a very important role to play in terms of real leadership in the African continent, encouraging those entrepreneurs, young leaders who wish to see an Africa based on the principles of individual freedom and liberty, the same principles that we hold so dearly here in the United States. And I think that is the long-term future for Africa. So I'm very optimistic about the long-term future, but there are some more pressing immediate problems as well.
So, Melvin, do you think the United States has a role to play, a useful role to play in promoting democracy in Africa, or will this be viewed by Africans as external meddling in their own affairs?
We have a role to play, but we got to be careful about that role. Historically, we tried to lecture Africa about democracy. And then, they're looking at CNN and seeing what's happening over here and saying, wait a minute, who are you to lecture me about my own democracy? I think the advent of this administration has exacerbated the problem. And the big man in Africa has become encouraged. This is a chance for Museveni to be a tyrant. This is a chance for some of the African leaders to hold on to their tyrannical viewpoints. But we can support democracy. We have the Young African Leaders Initiative, for instance, which brings thousands of young Africans to the U.S. for training and leadership training, and they are empowered. They leave here with a sense that, wow, I can do something. My country could be better. I can be a leader. I see a lot of positive, but it's not a zero-sum game. We have a lot of work to do. If we're trying to lecture Africa, we're wrong. But if we try to promote good governance, transparency, market-based economies, good economic development policies, I think we have a lot to offer Africa, but we have to be careful about the lecture side.
So, Niall, I want to ask you about something that's going on in Africa that might become, regrettably, a bigger issue for America. Recently, in the State of the Union, President Trump said that America is leaving Syria, that we've defeated Daesh, and that we're closing down our endless wars. But the threat of Daesh-style terrorism in Africa, regrettably, is very real. Groups like Boko Haram and al-Shabaab. Now, they haven't yet targeted America or Americans directly, but this could become, sadly, something on our radar. And I know that we are helping others, both Europeans and Africans, deal with this challenge domestically in Africa. Is Africa likely to become a battleground in the future chapter of our war on terror?
Well, I'm afraid it already has become a battleground in the global war against Islamist terrorism, as we've seen with the recent appalling terrorist attack in Nairobi, carried out by al-Shabaab, affiliated with al-Qaeda. And so, you have an ISIS and al-Qaeda presence in probably about 10 countries across the African continent. And the reality is we are already engaged in this war. And US leadership really does matter. And I think that, the United States has been already for many, many years, under this administration and also under the last two administrations, the Obama administration and also the George W. Bush administration, already engaged in the battle against Islamist terrorism on the African continent, ranging from Kenya to Uganda to Nigeria to North Africa as well, Algeria, Morocco. And the United States actually is very much part of this fight. So the war is already there. I don't think there's any indication from this administration that the United States is going to be pulling back its military efforts inside Africa. And if anything, if you look at the number of airstrikes that have been carried out against al-Qaeda or ISIS-affiliated groups, those airstrikes have been significantly increased. Libya is actually a very good example of that, where ISIS targets have been pummeled relentlessly actually by US airstrikes over the course of the last 2 years. Progress has been made, although Libya remains an extremely complicated situation. I would disagree with the argument that this administration is disengaged from Africa. I think it's very engaged. And I think that was very clear from Ambassador John Bolton's speech laying out his Africa strategy in Washington back in December, where he made it clear that Africa was not an afterthought, but a priority for the present U.S. administration, especially above all the fight against Islamist terrorism. And this is a battle, a war that's going to last for many years, maybe decades, and it's going to live on long after the current administration. And it's a war that we have to win.
So, Melvin, how seriously do you assess the terrorist threat inside Africa?
Well, one of the things we did, and the U.S. has always been short-sighted on a lot of these issues. We fought the war with ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And what happened, it spilled over into Libya. Libya, Gaddafi fell, and the weapons that Gaddafi had got disseminated across Africa. So Mali is paying a price. Niger is paying a price. Burkina Faso, all of the Sahelian states are paying a security price because we didn't secure. We fought the war. The war was against the West, but yet these countries in sub-Saharan Africa are paying that security price. Now we're telling these countries, you got to step up your defense spending. You got to spend more money on your own security and less money on education, less money on healthcare. We're going to pay a price for that too. So I was at the White House announcement of the new rollout in December. I was there, and I've also had contact with the administration in advance of that. I think it's a good strategy, but it's heavily linked to security and trade. I don't hear anything about HIV/AIDS. I don't hear anything about PEPFAR. I don't hear anything about Ebola. I don't hear anything about education. I don't hear anything about any of the security is more than guns and boots. It's also about security of food, security of water, security of lifestyle. I think we're very short on that.
Okay.
We're engaged, but we're not engaged fully in the way we should be engaged.
All right, very interesting. When we come back after the break, we're going to talk about U.S. policy toward Africa, what we are doing and what we should be doing in just a moment. Our guests today include Niall Gardner. Niall is director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation, one of Washington's most influential conservative think tanks. Previously, Niall had the privilege of serving as a foreign policy researcher for former British Prime Minister Thatcher. We are proud to note that Niall was named one of the 50 most influential Britons in the United States by the London Daily Telegraph. Sitting to his left is Melvin Foote. Melvin is the founder, president, and CEO of the Constituency for Africa, where for more than 20 years he has worked toward progress and empowerment of Africa and African people worldwide. He serves as a consultant to the World Bank on African diaspora issues, as well as advises the African Union's ambassador to the United States. He began his career in Africa more than 35 years ago as a Peace Corps volunteer in Eritrea and Ethiopia. So, gentlemen, different administrations have had different emphases in their relations with Africa. Some have focused on fighting AIDS. Some have focused on private sector investment. Some have focused on democracy. What's the right mix? What's the magic elixir that would really jumpstart America's relationship with this important part of the world? Melvin?
First of all, I think Africans like Americans. They like our spirit. They like the way we come out. We're ready to live in the village. We'll try the food. We'll do anything. Africans like Americans. I believe that. They think that America is a place where technology flows and the spirit of democracy flows. So we have a strategic advantage, say over a China or a Russia or other country because of that. I think in terms of the mix, we suffer from a lack of education. We're uninformed, underinformed, and misinformed about Africa. We're really not into really understanding the heartbeat of the continent. So we tend to approach Africa as a monolithic, really out of the wrong, I think. We made a lot of mistakes in Africa, but we've done some good also. I thought that George W. Bush has been the best president we've ever had on Africa, and I'm not a Republican, but when I say $15 billion for PEPFAR,
PEPFAR being the global effort led by the United States about AIDS.
Around HIV/AIDS. He stood up, we were pushing him to go $3 billion, and when he stood up to State of the Union and said $15 billion, we were shocked. Ron Dellums was my chairman then, and we were just shocked. Yes. And then he did $5 billion for the Millennium Challenge account. He did a good job on, he put together the best Africa team of any president since I've been in Washington. African Americans, we had no complaints. Colin Powell, Secretary of State, Condi Rice, National Security Advisor, and the Africa team was very informed, very engaged, and they did a great job. So I think we've shown some good sides to us, but we also shown some short-sightedness. We tend to do things short-term and then pull out. We don't do infrastructure, for instance. I remember very vividly the U.S. government say, oh, we don't do infrastructure. China comes in and do infrastructure? They build dams, they build irrigation systems, they're putting in railroads, and now we're looking to try to figure out how we compete with China. I don't think we can compete with China.
If you had 5 minutes with the president to offer him, a piece of advice, please, Mr. President, in terms of your Africa policy, do this. What would that be?
I would tell them to launch an initiative called Tech Africa.
Tech Africa.
Use American technology companies to take the lead, to talk about e-governance, e-agriculture, e-judiciary.
Being electronic.
Use that as your entryway. You're talking to the next generation who is digitally connected. I think we can empower and expand. We can reduce corruption that way. We can get the taxes right. We can do a lot of things using American technology to take the lead. So, Mr. President, think about Tech Africa on your bumper sticker when you run for re-election.
Interesting. All right, Niall?
Yeah, well, that's a great proposal. I would say, the number one priority for the United States right now with regard to Africa is the security situation. And it's in the interest of the United States and its African allies for ISIS and al-Qaeda to be emphatically defeated. And so I think the most important message the administration can send right now is that the United States is 100% committed to the defeat of Islamist terrorism, especially in East Africa, North Africa, West Africa. And if we don't defeat these terrorist organizations, then I think the future for Africa, or for certainly parts of Africa that are afflicted with Islamist terrorism, the future is going to be grim. So that, I think, is, in the immediate term, is the most important priority for the United States. I think the second, certainly, is the issue of trade and investment. That's what African economies need. And I think those two are the most important priorities. So the security aspect, the defeat of terrorism, and then combined with trade and investment, a totally different approach taken by both the Chinese and the Russians.
Fascinating, gentlemen. I hope you both get the opportunity to go to the White House and offer these insights to our president, because both of them sound like ideas this president may just take up. So with that, I want to thank you, Melvin. Thank you, Niall, for bringing Africa into our U.S. foreign policy debate here on Dakhel, Washington.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Saudi Arabia has a horrendous human rights record. They're involved in this brutal war in Yemen, and they killed an American journalist. And there's still no justice in that case, and there's still no truth. I mean, I have a bill that would cut off all military sales to Saudi Arabia until Congress voted to overturn that. But I mean, we should be banning weapons to Saudi Arabia. He didn't say a word. An American journalist was murdered and was dismembered by the Saudi government, and he didn't bring it up once.
After our wedding, my wife and I moved from England, where we had been living, to Yaoundé, the capital of Cameroon in West Africa. Both of us were pursuing our doctoral degrees, hers in public finance and health economics, mine in Middle East history. Her research was based on control of public health in 2 northern provinces in the country. Mine was based on the 600 pounds of British and American diplomatic documents I shipped to the country. For a year, we enjoyed our honeymoon in Cameroon. The Africa we knew certainly had its problems. Corruption, horrible infrastructure, strange and deadly diseases, tribal hatred, and did I say corruption? But it was also a place full of life, music, color, excitement, adventure, and wonderful, kind-hearted people. We loved almost every minute of that experience. Since then, Africa has suffered horribly. The genocides in Rwanda and Darfur, the horrible violence, war, and civil strife in Sierra Leone, Congo, Liberia, the rampage of the Lord's Liberation Army, and of course, terrorism. There was a time when Africa was someone else's battlefield, a place where Al-Qaeda attacked Americans, such as the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. But all over the continent, Africa is its own battlefield, a place where some of the world's worst terrorists spread hate, bloodshed, and human disaster. Until they started chopping off heads of Americans, President Obama considered Daesh to be a second-rate group of terrorists, the junior varsity, he called them. Before long, these amateurs took Mosul and a huge swath of Iraqi and Syrian territory. They set up a caliphate, joined forces with groups around the world, and we were at war. 5 years later, President Trump has declared victory and is now withdrawing our forces from the fight in Syria and perhaps Iraq. I hope we don't withdraw too far, leaving the allies of Daesh, like Boko Haram, free to grow, expand, and spread their venom throughout places like Africa. The billion people there are today on the front lines. Losing Africa to jihadists would only set the stage for future wars and future terror. What happens in Africa won't stay in Africa. Let's not think our victory in one place. If it is indeed victory, is victory every place? Regrettably, the fight continues. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول المعركة ضد الإرهاب في أفريقيا، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ Inside Washington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وإلى أن ألقاكم شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.